Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember to support, subscribe. The brutal torture and execution of Margaret Ward. Now, before we begin, it is important to remember that Elizabethan England was a time of great turmoil, pain and suffering. There was an astounding amount of religious intolerance, and it was in a crisis since Elizabeth's father Henry VIII split from the Catholic Church. The rules were forever changing, and the population of England was daunted by the prospects of having to give up what they believed in to fit in with the wishes of the realm. Edward VI continued the work of his father after he died, and he established Protestant England. Catholicism was outlawed, but when his half-sister, Mary I of England, began her reign, religion was reversed and Catholicism was again the main faith of England. Mary then went on to earn herself the nickname Bloody Mary through her persecutions of Protestants, and many were unfortunately executed by being burnt at the stake for heresy. The restoration of the Catholic faith caused a tremendous amount of controversy. When it was time for Elizabeth I to reign, she inherited a kingdom which was divided religiously, and the country needed to find a way to be reunited. Although Elizabeth tried, even by introducing the religious settlement, to reunite her people by asking the population to convert to Protestantism, there was still an undoubtedly tremendous amount of pain and suffering in the country. Today's tale is about a remarkable woman, Margaret Ward, and the events that led up to the heinous act of the Pearl of Tyburn's execution. Now, Margaret was born in Cheshire around the year 1550, and she earned the moniker of the Pearl of Tyburn because even when she was face on with death, she bravely stood up in her faith for what she believed in. Her upbringing isn't well known, but we do know that her family were good and they had a fair amount of wealth to their name. Once Margaret got older, she lived in London for a time in the household of a very distinct lady. Margaret worked in service as the lady's companion, and it was whilst Margaret was in her service that she learnt of the harsh treatment of Catholic priests. Father Richard Watson was one priest in particular. Now, he had been imprisoned at Bridewell prison, near to the River Thames. Now, interestingly, Bridewell prison was actually Bridewell Palace, and during the early years of Henry VIII's reign, he actually stayed here from time to time as one of his other homes. But when Henry VIII passed away, his son Edward VI actually gifted Bridewell Palace, as it was then called, to the City of London Corporation. Originally, after the transfer, it was used as an orphanage and a correctional facility for female criminals. But then in 1556, it was turned into a prison, and it was situated on the banks of Fleet River, and that is between Fleet Street and the Thames. Now, we all know that Tudor prisons have a reputation of being brutal and heinous, and Bridewell prison was no different. Alongside the Tower of London were to be places of execution and torture. Unsurprisingly, Father Watson had been tortured, so much so that to escape the heinous acts, he agreed to abandon his faith and convert to become a Protestant and even attend a Protestant service, all to gain his release. Another interesting fact is that all priests of the Catholic faith who refused to conform to Elizabeth I's religious settlement would have been imprisoned, tortured, and potentially executed if they declined to convert their faith and fall in line with the crown. But Father Watson, after his release, recounted his conversion and was ultimately sent back to prison. It is at this point that Margaret Ward became involved. She had heard of what had been happening and wanted to try and save the priest. Now, because Father Watson had been rearrested, the chances of him being executed were extremely high, and Margaret felt she needed to do something and break him out. She would go on to visit the priest multiple times, and would be subjected to searches both before and after the visits. She became a great source of comfort for Father Watson, and the pair would talk at length and in great detail about their religion. The more Margaret visited, the less suspicious the guards became, and the searches became laxed and more infrequent. This enabled Margaret to smuggle in a rope in her basket to Father Watson. This was to try and enable the priest to escape. Watson did try, but it wasn't an easy-going ordeal. Margaret, who had been accompanied by a boatman, waited in the street below the prison at around 2 a.m. They eagerly awaited for Watson to escape. But Father Watson, who had made it out onto the roof, made a judgment error. The rope was doubled up, and where it came to jumping across and lowering himself down, he did not have enough length left. Then, when Watson jumped and only had enough rope for half of the descent, he injured himself from the fall. And in the rush to leave the area, the biggest mistake the three made was leaving the rope behind. This in itself was a massive indicator that an escape had actually taken place. And unfortunately, the boatman, when he saw that the priest was injured, declined to help, so he left Margaret and Father Watson alone to fend for themselves in the streets of London. Margaret, now upset and distressed, needed to find the help of another man, and quickly. But this man happened to be John Roche. He provided a boat, and he and Father Watson changed clothes, something that would be of a massive help to Father Watson, but the downfall of Roche. The escape itself was successful, with Father Watson leaving the area, but John Roche was arrested for his involvement, and Margaret was also arrested when attempted to leave her home. She was the obvious culprit, because she was the only person who had been to see Father Watson, and only she could have given him the rope that he used to escape. What happened next is only the beginning for Margaret. When she was arrested, she was interrogated under torture. She was subjected to the manacles, a device that suspends you in the air with chains attached to your wrists, forcing your hands together. This method of torture took only a few moments to lead to excruciating pain, and Margaret was no exception. She was scourged and beaten, and this was to ensure that Margaret admitted to her guilt for her crime. Now the authorities wanted the location of Father Watson, but Margaret did not say a word. She was brave and strong, and she held on to what she believed in to protect the priest because she felt it was the right thing to do. Margaret endured torture and heinous treatment for 8 days before being placed on trial. During her trial, she said the following: "I cannot repent for having freed a lamb from the hands of the bloodthirsty wolves." Margaret was given the chance to save herself and take part in a Protestant church service and ask the Queen for mercy, but Margaret refused. She told the jury that her conscience didn't allow her to act against her faith. She said that she would rather give her life than deny God and the Catholic religion. Unsurprisingly and unfortunately, Margaret was then found guilty of her crimes and sentenced to death, and on the 30th of August 1558, only 1 day after her trial, Margaret was taken to the gallows in Tyburn in London. She, John Roche, and a number of Catholic priests were all led onto the scaffold whilst a crowd gathered. Because Margaret was a lady, she was spared being hung, drawn and quartered. She and John were hung in front of the onlookers. Margaret was recognised in 1970 by Pope Paul VI as one of 40 martyrs in England and Wales. But Margaret is also a saint, and she shares a feast day with St Margaret Clitherow and St Anne Line, and that feast day is the 30th of August. The stories of St Margaret Clitherow and St Anne Line are also very sad, but if you are interested in learning about them, then feel free to watch one of my other videos on both these remarkable women. Margaret's story isn't one on its own in history, and the terrible events are all too familiar throughout the reign of Henry, Mary, Edward and Elizabeth. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.